Good evening. Welcome back to Ponzinomics. I'm Alex.
Evening all, I'm Sam. Tonight is slightly different from our usual fare. Tonight's story doesn't start with a plan. There's no mastermind, no elaborate architecture of deception built from day one. Tonight's story starts with a mistake, a small mistake, and a decision not to admit it.
Everything after that is consequence.
Singapore, 1995. A 28-year-old from Watford, a secret account, and the end of a bank that had been operating since 1762.
This is Nick Leeson, and the fall of Barings Bank. Barings Bank, founded in 1762, the oldest merchant bank in Britain. It had financed the Napoleonic Wars, it had helped the United States complete the Louisiana Purchase, it had survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and over 2 centuries of financial turmoil. It was one of those institutions so old and so established that its continued existence felt like a law of nature.
And Nick Leeson?
Nick Leeson was born in 1967 on a council estate in Watford. His father was a plasterer, his mother was a nurse. He left school with 6 O-levels and 2 A-levels and started his career as a clerk at Coutts, the private bank, settling paper checks. He moved to Morgan Stanley, then joined Barings in 1989 on a salary of £12,000 a year.
£12,000 a year at Barings. The man who would eventually cost them $827 million.
He was good at his job, genuinely good. He was sent to Jakarta to sort out a back-office mess, £100 million in unpaid share certificates, and he sorted it. He was sent to Singapore in 1992 to set up and run Barings' new futures trading operation on the Singapore International Monetary Exchange.
And here's where it starts to go wrong.
Here is exactly where it starts to go wrong. Barings gave Leeson control of both the front office, the trading, and the back office, the checking and settlement. This is a fundamental control failure. It's like asking someone to mark their own homework. The entire point of having a separate back office is that it catches errors and irregularities in the trading. If the same person runs both, there is no check.
Nobody catches anything. Because the person checking is the person doing.
There's one more detail worth noting before we get to the fraud itself. Before Leeson went to Singapore, he applied for a broker's license in the UK. He was denied. Because he had committed fraud on his application, he failed to disclose a debt judgment against him from NatWest Bank. Neither Leeson nor Barings disclosed this denial when he applied for his Singapore license.
So the man running Barings' Singapore trading operation had already committed fraud on a license application in the UK. And nobody mentioned it.
Nobody mentioned it.
Tremendous start.
In Singapore, Leeson opened what's called an error account, a standard mechanism for temporarily holding and correcting trading mistakes. He numbered it 88888. 8
is a lucky number in Chinese culture.
8 is considered extremely lucky in Chinese culture, yes. The account was set up legitimately. What happened next was not. The first use of the account, the moment the story really begins, was to cover a mistake made by a junior member of his team. She had been instructed to buy 20 futures contracts for a client. She sold them instead. The cost to Barings? £20,000.
£20,000.
£20,000. Leeson could have reported it. It was a small error, easily explained, easily absorbed. Instead, he hid it in account 88888.
Why?
He said he wanted to protect her, to avoid the mistake going on her record. And once he'd hidden one error, hiding the next was easier. He used the account to cover mistakes made by another trader on his team, a man who, by Leeson's account, frequently came to work after long nights of partying.
Brilliant. The account that started as protection for a junior employee became a general dumping ground for the consequences of someone else's hangovers.
The moment Leeson himself says he crossed into genuine criminal conduct was when he forgot to reconcile a discrepancy of 500 contracts. The cost? $1.7 million. He decided the only way to keep his job was to hide it. So into account 88888 it went.
From £20,000 to $1.7 million. And the hole keeps growing.
To try to trade his way out of the hole, Leeson used what's called a doubling strategy, a gambling technique. Every time you lose, you bet double the amount on the next trade to recoup the loss. If it works, you're back to even. If it doesn't work,
The hole doubles.
the hole doubles, and then doubles again. In 1993, this actually worked. He managed to cover a £6 million deficit through trading and briefly got back to something approaching even. He swore he'd never use the account again.
And then he used the account again.
Yeah, he used the account again. By the end of 1992, account 88888 held losses of £2 million. By late 1993, $23 million. By the end of 1994, £208 million.
208 million hidden in an error account that he was supposed to be overseeing himself.
Meanwhile in London, Barings thought Leeson was a genius. His reported trading profits were extraordinary. In 1992 alone, he appeared to generate £10 million in profit, accounting for 10% of Barings' entire annual profit. He earned a bonus of £130,000 on his £50,000 salary. Everyone at Barings loved Nick Leeson. The more he lost, the more he pretended to win. The better he looked, the more cash London sent him to fund the positions.
They were funding their own destruction. Every pound they sent him to cover his winning positions was going into the hole.
On the 16th of January, 1995, Leeson placed what's called a short straddle, a bet that the Japanese stock market would not move significantly overnight. It was a reasonable assumption on any normal night.
And
At 5:46 in the morning on January 17th, the Great Hanshin earthquake struck Kobe, Japan, magnitude 6.9, 6,000 people killed, enormous destruction.
the earth moved, and the market moved with it.
The market moved significantly. Asian markets dropped. Leeson's position was immediately catastrophic. Rather than accept the loss and confess everything, he did what he'd always done. He doubled. He placed increasingly massive bets that the Nikkei would recover quickly. It didn't.
An earthquake. He was undone by an earthquake.
The losses were accelerating beyond anything that could be hidden. By late February 1995, account 88888 held losses of £827 million, approximately $1.4 billion. This was more than twice Barings' entire available trading capital.
Oops. The losses were larger than the bank.
Yeah, the losses were considerably larger than the bank.
At what point did he realize it was over?
Presumably somewhere around that point. On the 23rd of February, 1995, Nick Leeson left his office in Singapore. He left a note on his desk. It said 2 words.
Yeah, debt twice the size of the available capital is definitely a good indicator that it's game over. What did they say?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. 233 years of Barings Bank, £827 million. And he left a post-it note saying, I'm sorry. So kind of him.
Leeson fled. Malaysia first, then Thailand, then, and this is one of my favorite details in the whole story, he went on holiday to Borneo with his wife.
He went on holiday.
He went on holiday. While Barings was collapsing behind him, while regulators and investigators were scrambling, while the Bank of England was attempting to organize a rescue, Nick Leeson was on a beach in Borneo.
Yeah, why not? When you've just destroyed a 233-year-old bank.
The attempted rescue failed. On the 26th of February, 1995, Barings Bank was declared insolvent. It was subsequently purchased by the Dutch bank ING.
For how much?
£1.
Bargain.
You can say that again. £1 sterling. The Queen's Bank, founded in 1762. Gone for £1.
I could have bought a bank with my paper round.
Yeah, it's wild when you think about it. Next, Leeson eventually made his way to Germany. He was arrested at Frankfurt Airport on the 23rd of March, extradited to Singapore. In December 1995, he was sentenced to 6.5 years in Changi Prison. It's notoriously terrible.
In that case, I better cross it off my bucket list.
Yeah, good call. Changi is not a pleasant prison. While he was there, he was diagnosed with colon cancer. He recovered. He was released in July 1999, having served 4 years and 4 months. Nick Leeson is now 59 years old. He lives in Galway, Ireland. He's been married twice. He was briefly CEO of Galway United Football Club, which subsequently ran into financial difficulties.
Who could have seen that one coming?
I know, right? This obviously prompted his resignation. He now works as a private investigator of financial misconduct.
He is a private investigator. Of financial misconduct, the man who hid £800 million in an error account is now investigating financial misconduct. I guess at least he's qualified for it. I mean, who would better know what signs to look out for than him?
Yeah, in all fairness, it's true. He is also active on the corporate speaking circuit. He gives talks to companies about risk management and corporate responsibility. He has said that 2 events a month is enough to keep him in the manner to which he's accustomed.
Of course he does. Of course Nick Leeson makes a comfortable living telling companies how not to be Nick Leeson.
His trading jacket from the Singapore exchange floor was sold on eBay after his conviction. It fetched £21,000.
£21,000 for a jacket from a man who lost £800 million. Someone paid £21,000 for that jacket. Wait, wasn't that entire spiral started with a £20,000 loss? God definitely has a sense of irony.
Oh yeah, good point. I hadn't thought of that. He also wrote a book about it, his autobiography, Rogue Trader. The New York Times reviewed it and wrote, and I want to be accurate here, "This is a dreary book, written by a young man very taken with himself, but it ought to be read by banking managers and auditors everywhere."
A dreary book written by a young man very taken with himself. That is an absolutely devastating review. If that was a boxing match, that line right there was a clean knockout. Here's what makes Barings different from everything we've done so far. With Madoff, with Enron, with Wirecard, the people at the centre knew. They built the fraud deliberately. With Nick Leeson, and I'm not saying he's a victim because he's not, he made choices at every stage, but the scale of what happened was not what he intended on day one. He intended to hide £20,000. The rest was consequence.
Which raises an uncomfortable question. How many corporate disasters start that way? Not with a plan to defraud, but with a small mistake, a decision not to admit it, and then the compounding pressure of having to keep the deception going.
Once you hide the first thing, you have to hide the second, and the second makes the third inevitable. And by the time the hole is the size of the bank, There is no version of events where you admit it and everything's fine.
The structural failure at Barings was as important as Leeson's choices. One person running both front and back office is not a small oversight. It's the entire control framework failing, and Barings and London sent him more and more cash without asking the questions they should have asked, because his reported profits were too good to question.
Nobody wanted to ask how the magic trick worked, because the magic trick was making them all look brilliant.
There's also the broker's license. Leeson had already committed fraud on a UK license application. Barings knew. Nobody said anything. He went to Singapore anyway. The controls that existed, the checks that should have caught this years earlier, were either absent, ignored, or deliberately circumvented.
A £20,000 mistake, hidden in an error account, grew to 827 million in 3 years, because nobody checked the dealings of a man who shouldn't have been there in the first place. I'm not saying they deserved it, but they definitely had plenty of warning to swerve round the iceberg, so to speak.
The fraud was shielded and nurtured by a catalogue of errors.
And the man who did it is now in Galway, doing after-dinner speeches about risk. I genuinely don't know whether to be appalled or impressed.
Both, I think.
What did we learn?
That the smallest decision, to hide £20,000 rather than admit a mistake, can become, through compounding, an institutional catastrophe. That controls exist for a reason, and the reason is that without them, the person checking is the person hiding. That no institution is too old, too prestigious, or too established to be destroyed by one person with unsupervised access and a gambling strategy. And that the great Hanshin earthquake, among its many catastrophic consequences, also ended the British Empire's oldest bank.
A plasterer's son from Watford. Account 88888. An earthquake in Japan. 233 years of Barings Bank. £1 to ING. A note saying, "I'm sorry." 4 years in Changi prison. And now, after dinner speeches in Galway. At 2 events a month.
Next time, we go to New York, London, and the world of 90s hip-hop music videos. A company called Long-Term Capital Management, run by 2 Nobel Prize winners and a former vice chairman of the Federal Reserve, that nearly took down the entire global financial system. They had the most sophisticated mathematical models in history. The models were wrong.
This time it's different, right?
It never is.